उपस्थित आप सभी सभागणों को मेरा प्रणाम करती हूँ। सभी सम्माननीय अतिथिगणों एवं प्रतिभागियों को मेरी संपूर्ण आयोजन समिति एवं प्रशासन की ओर से सुप्रभात एवं हार्दिक अभिनंदन करती हूँ। आज मैं बहुत हर्ष एवं सम्मानित अनुभव कर रही हूँ कि मुझे इस मंच के द्वारा सुप्रसिद्ध कलाकार सारंगी नवाज उस्ताद सबीर खान साहब को परिचित कराने का सौभाग्यशाली अवसर प्राप्त हुआ। आपके सम्मान में कुछ पंक्तियां कहना चाहूंगी। ईश्वर ने भी कीमती रतन गिनती के ही बनाए हैं। ईश्वर ने भी कीमती रतन गिनती के ही बनाए हैं। उन रत्नों में सबसे कीमती आज हमारे बीच आए हैं। आपका जन्म संगीत घराना जयपुर में हुआ है। आपने 3 वर्ष की आयु से सारंगी वादन एवं वोकल में विश्व प्रसिद्ध पद्मश्री सारंगी वादक उस्ताद मोइनुद्दीन खान से शिक्षा ग्रहण की। इसके अतिरिक्त आपने लखनऊ स्थित भातखंडे संगीत महाविद्यालय से सारंगी एवं वोकल विशारद में प्रशिक्षण प्राप्त किया है। साथ ही आपने न केवल ऑल इंडिया रेडियो, दूरदर्शन के कई राष्ट्रीय कार्यक्रमों में एक कलाकार के रूप में अपनी कला का प्रदर्शन किया है, बल्कि आईसीसीआर के माध्यम से फ्रांस, जर्मनी, कनाडा, अमेरिका एवं ईरान जैसे अन्य देशों में भी अपनी कला के प्रदर्शन के द्वारा दर्शकों को आनंदित किया है। इसके अतिरिक्त आपको कई पुरस्कारों एवं शीर्षकों के द्वारा भी सम्मानित किया गया है, जिसमें मुख्यतः शामिल है राजस्थान गौरव पुरस्कार, राज्य स्तरीय पुरस्कार, स्वर्गीय श्री महेंद्र भट्ट संगीत पुरस्कार आदि। हिंदुस्तानी शास्त्रीय, भारतीय संगीत एवं लयकारी के साथ विलंबित एवं ध्रुत में अस्थायी आलाप अंतरा को प्रस्तुत करने की डिजिटल विधि के लिए प्रसिद्ध हैं। अतः आप सभी का अधिक समय न लेते हुए और हमारे आज के कार्यक्रम को आगे बढ़ाते हुए मैं हमारे उपस्थित प्रतिष्ठित कलाकार सारंगी नवाज उस्ताद सबीर खान साहब को मंच में आमंत्रित करना चाहूंगी। उनसे अनुरोध करती हूँ कि वह आज हमारे सभी प्रतिभागियों को अपनी कला के द्वारा मंत्रमुग्ध करें। जी, खान साहब।
आदाब, नमस्कार, सत श्री अकाल जी। सबसे पहले तो मैं जसविंदर जी का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ कि उन्होंने मुझे इस काबिल समझा, इस लायक समझा, मुझे आज इतने खूबसूरत ग्रुप से मुझे ज्वाइन करवाया और इतने अच्छे बताया उन्होंने कि सारे अच्छा संगीत सुनने वाले लोग हैं। तो मैं मतलब इस चीज़ का मैं बहुत मतलब अच्छा मानता हूँ कि अभी भी क्लासिकल म्यूजिक को सुनने वाले बहुत अच्छे अच्छे लोग हैं। और बाकी ये जो मेरा इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, ये इसको सारंगी बहुत तरीके की होती है, लेकिन ये वाली जो सारंगी है ये क्लासिकल इंस्ट्रूमेंट है और इसमें 42 वायर्स होते हैं। एंड इसको बजाने से पहले सारंगी बजाने से पहले गाना सीखना बहुत ज़रूरी होता है। तो पहले मैंने गाना सीखा और उसके बाद फिर मैं मतलब 3 साल का था तब से ही मेरे गुरुजी और मेरे मामा जी उन्होंने मुझे संगीत की तालीम दी। मतलब 3 साल से उन्होंने मेरा गाना स्टार्ट करवा दिया। फिर उसके बाद जब मैं 10 साल का था तब से फिर सारंगी की एजुकेशन स्टार्ट की। तो मतलब आज मैं वो जो 3 साल की उम्र में जो मैंने पेश किया था वो भी मैं आपको प्रेजेंट करूंगा। और वैसे आज राजस्थानी थीम को लेके कुछ हम लोगों ने डिसाइड किया है। तो सबसे पहले मैं आपके सामने राजस्थानी ट्रेडिशनल सॉन्ग केसरिया बालम आओ नी पधारो मारे देश, वो मैं आपके सामने प्रेजेंट कर रहा हूँ। तो उम्मीद करता हूँ आपको पसंद आएगा। तो सभी से इजाजत चाहता हूँ।
जरूर।
और एक बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट बात यह है कि ये जो मेरा इंस्ट्रूमेंट है जो अभी मैं प्ले कर रहा हूँ उसको, ये 350 साल पुराना इंस्ट्रूमेंट है। ये 350 साल से हमारे पास है। इसको मेरे जो नाना जी थे उनके फादर बजाते थे। उससे पहले किनके पास था ये नहीं मालूम, लेकिन 350 साल से हमारे पास है। तो ये भी एक तरीके से हमारी धरोहर है और ये हमें विरासत में मिला है। हाँ, और इसमें मतलब काफी ऐसी रेयर चीजें, मतलब इसको बनाने के लिए रेयर चीजों का इस्तेमाल किया, जैसे हाथी दांत हुआ, हिरण सींग हुए, और भी बहुत, मतलब मैं आपको सारा ये जैसे देखिए, मैं आपको सारंगी भी दिखाता हूँ। ये देखिए, ये हाथी दांत है, इसकी जो ये ब्रिज है, ये हाथी दांत है, और ये गोट लंग्स है, एंड ये ऊंट की पसली है, ये हिरण की सींग है, इससे ये बनती है। मतलब ये आज से करीबन 350 साल पुराना इंस्ट्रूमेंट है। तो मैं आपके सामने और ये दुनिया का सबसे डिफिकल्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, क्योंकि इसमें जैसे हम लोग गिटार बजाते हैं या हारमोनियम, कीबोर्ड, पियानो, ये सब बजाते हैं, तो इसमें एक हमको मालूम होता है कि यहाँ पर ये फ्लैट्स बने हुए हैं, कि यहाँ पे सा है, यहाँ पे रे है, वगैरह वगैरह। लेकिन ये देखिए, एकदम ये ब्लाइंड इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, इसको बजाना बड़ा मुश्किल है। तो इसके लिए तो जितनी हम लोग लगन और जितनी मेहनत से हम इसको करें, तब ही ये बच सकता है। तो अब आप देखिएगा, ये यहाँ से फिंगर्स, ये देखिए, यहाँ से ये प्ले होता है, तो यहाँ कट्स लग जाते हैं, फिर
हाँ हाँ
ब्लड आता है, फिर ये पकती है उंगलियां, उसके बाद फिर कोई एक आर्टिस्ट बनता है। तो
जी।
मैं आपके सामने केसरिया बालम, हमारे राजस्थान का ट्रेडिशनल सॉन्ग, वेलकम सॉन्ग, वो आपके सामने प्रेजेंट कर रहा हूँ। तो उम्मीद करता हूँ आपको बेहद पसंद आएगा। इजाजत है। केसरिया बालमा केसरिया बालम जे आवो ने पधारो मारे देश, पधारो मारे देश। मतलब ये इसको एक्सप्लेन भी मैं करता हूँ कि केसरिया बालम आओ नी पधारो मारे देश। इसका मीनिंग ये है कि वो जो उसके हस्बैंड है, वाइफ घर पे इंतजार कर रही है, और उसके हस्बैंड मतलब दूर कहीं कमाने के लिए गए हुए हैं, तो काफी डेज हो गए, अब उसको मिस कर रही है। तो वो उसको मतलब इतना उसको प्यार आ रहा है अपने हस्बैंड पे, कि वो बोल रही है कि केसरिया बालम, केसर जैसे हस्बैंड, केसरिया बालम आओ नी पधारो मारे देश। तो मतलब आओ नी मतलब आपका वेलकम है, आप आओ घर। तो केसरिया बालम, केसरिया बालम जे आवो ने पधारो मारे देश, पधारो मारे देश। केसरिया बालम जे आवो ने पधारो मारे देश। साजन साजन मैं करूं तो साजन जीव जड़ी। अब वो बोल रही है कि साजन साजन मैं करूं तो साजन जीव जड़ी, मतलब इतना क्लोज है कि वो मतलब जैसे बोलते हैं ना हमारे जीव, मतलब दिल के करीब है इतना। तो साजन साजन मैं करूं तो साजन जीव जड़ी। चुड़लाऊं पर मांड लूं तो बाचू खड़ी खड़ी। मतलब अपनी चूड़ी के ऊपर मैं ऐसे लिख लूं, और मतलब बाचू का मतलब होता है कि मैं वेट कर रही हूँ, मतलब उसको बाचू का मतलब उसको पढूं बार बार, मतलब चूड़ी पर लिखकर उसको बार बार पढ़ती रहूं कि कब आएंगे वो। चुड़लाऊं पर मांड लूं तो बाचू खड़ी खड़ी। केसरिया पलंग थे आवो ने पधारो मारे देश। एक बालिका वधू करके सीरियल आता था, और आता भी है अभी भी। उसका एक टाइटल सॉन्ग है, वो मैंने ही प्ले किया था सारंगी से। तो वो भी मैं, वो राजस्थानी थी मैं, तो वो भी मैं आपके सामने प्रेजेंट करूंगा इसी में। तो छोटी सी उम्र, तो वो मैं आपके सामने। ये मैंने सीरियल में बजाया था, और काफी हिट भी हुआ आपकी दुआ से। तो एक आपने एक कोक स्टूडियो में सुना होगा चौधरी करके, तो वो भी मैं आपके सामने प्रेजेंट करूंगा उसको। क्यों? ये अपने कोक स्टूडियो में सुना भी होगा। मामे मामे खान ने गाया भी है इसको। और मतलब ये हमारे राजस्थान का काफी पुराना ट्रेडिशनल है, इसको फिर नया वर्जन उन्होंने दिया और काफी बेहतर किया इसको। तो पहले गांव के अंदर जो लेडीज होती थी वो इसको गाया करती थी, जब उनके घर में शादियां होती थी तो वहां पे जो गांव की लेडीज होती थी वो केसरिया बालम हुआ, ये चौधरी हुआ, और भी एक घूमर हुआ, जैसे घूमर अभी पद्मावत मूवी में इन्होंने लिया, तो वैसे ही जो ओरिजिनल घूमर है वो भी मैं आपको प्ले करके सुनाता हूँ। घूमर छेन कराली हे माँ, घूमर रम वाल में गश्याम और घूमर रम वाल में गश्याम उन्मारी घूमर छेन कराली माँ, ओ मारी घूमर छेन कराली हे माँ, घूमर रम में गश्या और रजनी घूमर रम में गश्या। तो ये भी राजस्थान की एक बहुत ही अच्छी खुशबू है घूमर की भी। तो ये घूमर हो गया, और एक जसविंदर जी ने फरमाइश की थी मुझसे, तो वो भी मैं आपको जरूर सुनाना चाहूंगा। वो हमारे देश के प्रति मतलब थोड़ा सा अपन योगदान देते हैं म्यूजिक के जरिए। तो वंदे मातरम में आपको सारंगी पर सुना रहा हूँ, उम्मीद करता हूँ आपको पसंद आए। है मेरे प्यारे वतन, ये भी था। तो आप बिल्कुल समझ आया होगा आपको।
जी 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 जी।
एक अभी जैसे मेरे कुछ लाइव कॉन्सर्ट्स होते हैं, तो उनमें मतलब अभी तो आप जानते हैं कि बाहर तो प्रोग्राम हो नहीं रहे, और ये जो हमारे महामारी चल रही है कोरोना की, तो उसकी वजह से ऑनलाइन कॉन्सर्ट्स हो रहे हैं। तो उसमें आजकल मैं पूरा प्रोग्राम एंड करने के बाद एक मैं लास्ट में एक उसको खुद से दुआ मांग लें या कुछ भी ले, क्योंकि एक ये म्यूजिक ऐसा जरिया होता है कि हम खुदा को मतलब एक तरह से उसके पास पहुंच सकते हैं इसके
हम्म।
जरिए। तो म्यूजिक एक ऐसी चीज है, तो मतलब मैंने सोचा कि अपन सारंगी से क्यों ना एक प्रार्थना की जाए। तो मैं एक बहुत अच्छा भजन है, वो मैं आपके सामने प्रेजेंट करता हूँ, आप बताइएगा कौन सा है। शुक्रिया, थैंक यू। बाकी अभी मैं जो भी
रघुपति
कॉन्सेप्ट
राघव
देता
राजा
हूँ।
राम था, ये सबने गेस किया।
अरे थैंक यू, बिल्कुल सही गेस किया आपने। और क्योंकि आप खुद सुरीले लोग हैं, अच्छा सुनने वाले लोग हैं, तो
बहुत सुंदर बजाया
सुन लेते
आपने,
तो मैं
बहुत
पहले ही बता
सुंदर बजाया। और सारंगी का ये मधुर आपने जो निवेदन किया, ये इतना श्रुति मधुर था कि मैं आपको कुछ कह ही नहीं सकती।
अरे थैंक यू सो मच। ये बस आप लोगों की ब्लेसिंग की वजह से ही है, क्योंकि गाना बजाना दुआओं का ही काम है। जब तक हम लोग, मैं तो ये बोलता हूँ कि छोटों की भी दुआएं लें, बड़ों की भी दुआएं लें, एक आर्टिस्ट को तो ऐसा करना चाहिए। और ये ब्लेसिंग का ही काम है, और बिना ब्लेसिंग के होता नहीं है। अपने मम्मी पापा की दुआएं लें और अपने जो गुरुजी हैं उनकी दुआएं लें। तो ये मतलब हमें बचपन में यही सिखाया कि हो सके ना, म्यूजिक जितना लेना है वो लीजिए, लेकिन उससे ज्यादा दुआएं लीजिए, तो वो बहुत काम करेंगी। तो मतलब बस मैं यही कोशिश करता हूँ कि मतलब मैं जहाँ दुआएं मिल रही है वहां से दुआएं बटोर लूं। तो आप लोगों की भी उम्मीद करता हूँ कि आपको पसंद आया होगा। वो
बिल्कुल।
आपको पसंद आया है तो फिर वो दुआएं बन रही है। और
बहुत बहुत अच्छी सुबह कर दी आपने
बहुत
हमारी,
सुंदर।
बहुत अच्छी सुबह की शुरुआत कर दी और बहुत मजा आया, बहुत आनंद आया। और जसविंदर जी का स्पेशल शुक्रिया जिसने आपसे मिलवाया हमको, बहुत अच्छा लगा।
बहुत अच्छे हैं जसविंदर
थैंक
जी,
यू मैम,
और
थैंक यू मैम,
इन्हीं की बदौलत हम
थैंक
सबको
यू।
मिले हैं। और ईश्वर इनको बहुत अच्छा रखे। और जब भी मैं
थैंक यू।
दिल्ली आऊंगा तो जरूर आपसे जरूर मिलूंगा जसविंदर जी।
बस पक्का पक्का पक्का, जरूर जरूर।
बाकी बहुत अच्छा
हमारी
लगा।
ऑडियंस
और
एक्चुअली अभी और भी बहुत सारा रिक्वेस्ट डाल रहे हैं कि वैष्णव जन को भी बजा दीजिए, ये भी वो भी।
अच्छा,
हम खुद भी बहुत ज्यादा चाह रहे हैं, लेकिन आप जैसे भी कंफर्टेबल हो, हम बिल्कुल भी
चलिए
आपको
मैं
स्ट्रेच
बिल्कुल
नहीं करेंगे,
बजाऊंगा,
आप
बिल्कुल
जैसे
जरूर
कंफर्टेबल
बजाऊंगा,
हो। हाँ जी।
बिल्कुल बजाता हूँ। वैष्णव जन को शरण कहिए जे, पीड़ पराई जाने रे। वैष्णव जन को शरण कहिए जे, पीड़ पराई जाने रे। सगम पनि सरि नि द पदम, गम पद नि द पदम गरे रे नि द पनि सरि मग सा नि द पदम गरे। वैष्णव जन जी, एक मेरा बहुत फेवरेट सॉन्ग है, लता जी का गाया हुआ है, और काफी ओल्ड मूवी है, तो वो भी आपको, उस मूवी का सॉन्ग है, वो भी आपको बड़ा पसंद आएगा। तो मैं अंत में आपको वो भी सुनाना चाहूंगा।
बिल्कुल।
आपको बताना पड़ेगा लेकिन गाना खत्म होने के बाद कि कौन सा सॉन्ग है।
ठीक है।
जी।
साये के हम आएंगे बारे बार, बाहें गले में डाल हम रोल जार जार, आंखों से फिर ये प्यार की बरसात हो शायद फिर जन्म मुलाकात हो। आकाश हो आज जाने की जिद ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, यूं ही पहलू में बैठे रहो, यूं ही पहलू में बैठे रहो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, हाय मर जाएंगे हम तो लौट जाएंगे, हाय मर जाएंगे हम तो लौट जाएंगे, ऐसी बातें किया ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, तुम भी सोचो जरा क्यों न रोके तुम्हें, जान जाती है जब उठ के जाते हो तुम, मदनी करीनी मदनी मनी पर, तुम भी सोचो जरा क्यों न रोके तुम्हें, जान जाती है उठ के जाते हो तुमको अपनी कसम जाने जा, बात इतनी मेरी मान लो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, हाय मर जाएंगे हम तो लुट जाएंगे, ऐसी बातें किया ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो। Thank you so much.
अनीता मैम, अनीता मैम, अनुज जी सबको आप म्यूट कर दीजिए। अनुज जी
हाँ
कीजिए।
बहुत सुंदर, बहुत मधुर साबिर खान जी। मैं अपनी भावनाओं को
एक सेकेंड अनीता मैम, एक सेकेंड प्लीज। ऑल द कंटेस्टेंट्स योरसेल्फ, प्लीज म्यूट, बहुत शोर आ रहा है। हाँ जी प्लीज। हाँ मैं वो I just realized. Please take over, Anita ma'am. Anita ma'am, please take over and Anuj ji please ensure कि सब mute पे हों।
बहुत सुंदर, बहुत ही मधुर साबिर खान जी। आज मैं अपनी भावनाओं को व्यक्त नहीं कर पाती हूँ। जिस तरह से आपने गीत को अनुवाद किया, उसका विवरण किया, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। और हम सबको मंत्रमुग्ध किया इस गीत से। इस तनाव भरी स्थिति में आपके संगीत ने हम सभी को बहुत ज्यादा मंत्रमुग्ध किया। इसका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। तो धन्यवाद सारंगी नवाज उस्ताद साबिर खान साहब का कि आज आपने अपनी कला के प्रदर्शन से हमारे द्विदिवसीय सम्मेलन को चार चांद लगाए एवं इसे यादगार बनाया। मैं अपनी माननीय प्रधानाचार्य डॉक्टर प्रोमिला कुमार, आयोजन समिति, प्रशासन, तकनीकी विभाग एवं सभी प्रतिभागियों की ओर से आपका हृदय से धन्यवाद करती हूँ कि आपने अपना कीमती समय निकालकर हमारे कार्यक्रम में शिरकत की। इसी के साथ मैं अपनी सहकर्मी डॉक्टर सुप्रिया सिंह से आग्रह करती हूँ कि वह अगले सत्र के विषय में हमारे सभी प्रतिभागियों को अवगत कराएं। इतने धैर्य से सुनने के लिए आप सभी का धन्यवाद। आप सभी का दिन शुभ हो।
थैंक यू सबीर खान जी, थैंक यू सो मच। आप म्यूट पर हैं, आप म्यूट पर हैं। ठीक है, ओके। सो डॉक्टर सुप्रिया, प्लीज टेक ओवर।
Thank you, Dr. Jaswinder. Thank you, Dr. Anita. After this soulful music session, let us all know about becoming a super ager. But before I introduce to you all our next speaker for today, it is requested that participants may please type in questions in the chat box and we shall take these once the talk is over. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Dr. John Bellon, who is a clinical neuropsychologist and specializes in assessing adults with concerns about their memory and other cognitive abilities. He has completed his training at several top-tier institutions, including Loma Linda University, University of California, Yale University, and Brown University. Although his clinical interests are broad, he is particularly passionate about reducing risk for cognitive decline and improving overall health through lifestyle modification. He has lectured extensively on the power that exercise, healthy diet, quality sleep, psychological well-being, and staying cognitively and socially active have on maintaining and improving cognitive functioning both now and as we age. Additionally, Dr. Bellon is the co-creator and host of neuropsychology-specific podcast, Navigating Neuropsychology, where he discusses important topics in the field and interviews experts in a variety of relevant areas. Further, Dr. Bellon is the lead author of the upcoming book, Becoming a Neuropsychologist, which provides advice and guidance to students interested in pursuing neuropsychology as a profession. I welcome you, Dr. John Bellon. Over to you.
Dr. Bellon, can you please come on screen?
Yep. Hello, everyone.
Hello, sir. I can't see you. Please switch on your video. Yeah. Welcome, sir.
Hi. Can you see and hear me now?
Yeah. We can see you. So there's a share button at the bottom of the bottom of this whole window. When you click on it,
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
There's a share button with an upward arrow.
Perfect. Yep, I see it. It's going to ask me to leave the meeting. I'll be right back in to set up to set it up. I'll be right back.
All right.
So I'm setting up the share
Yes,
right
Dr.
now.
John. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we can see the slides. It's working perfectly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see the mouse moving as well? If I point to certain things?
Yeah. We can see
Perfect.
it.
Okay, great. All right. And my audio is okay? You can hear me just fine?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to all the organizers of the NeuroUnoia conference for inviting me to present. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about small changes that we can all incorporate into our everyday lives that will not only boost our thinking skills right now, but will significantly reduce our risk of dementia and cognitive problems later down the road. And although it's, of course, never too late to make these healthy changes, the research is consistently showing us that the earlier we start these behaviors, the better. So as an overview, I'm going to explain what neuroplasticity is. I'll quickly mention how cognitive abilities, our thinking skills, change as we get older. I'll tell you about superagers and blue zones. I want to focus a lot of our time on the different lifestyle factors that have been shown to enhance and maintain brain health and cognitive abilities. Spoiler alert, I'm going to convince you to start riding a bike if you don't already regularly ride. That is going to hit 3 of these behaviors just right there. And then I'll talk about a few things that we can avoid, some barriers to making changes, and what we can do to promote healthy behaviors in our societies as well. Just so you know, I do receive some funding from the International Neuropsychological Society through a partnership with my podcast, and I'm going to be soon receiving royalties also from Springer, just to disclose the conflicts of interest. So we used to think that the brain was set in stone after childhood and that we couldn't really change our brain cells or how they work. And we now know that that's not true, that we can change our brain throughout life, both in good ways and unfortunately in bad ways as well. Because our brains can be molded or shaped sort of like plastic. This down here, it's a drawing of a brain cell, a neuron. This is the body right here, and these are called dendrites. They're kind of like tree branches that connect to other neurons and pass along information. And when the cell is active and when certain other conditions are met, these branches can grow, as you see here in this picture. And that's important because when the cells grow, they make more connections with their neighbors, and the existing connections get stronger. Our brains work by constantly sending signals between different brain areas, kind of like airports bringing people to and from different locations. And the more of these right kinds of connections, the better. Now, the opposite can also happen, where if the cells are not used very often, or they're not given the right kind of nutrients, they can shrivel up and lose connections, making the signals weaker and slower. So it's a two-way street. It goes in both directions. And as we age, it becomes more difficult for our neurons to grow and to make these kinds of connections, which we think is a big part of why our thinking skills, like problem solving and the speed at which we can process information or memory, it all shows a steady decline, believe it or not, beginning as early as our 20s, and slowly declines. The trajectory just continues downhill for most abilities. Vocabulary is one of the exceptions to this, but this general cognitive decline happens if you are the average person. But of course, I don't want you to be average. I want you to be what we call a superager. And superagers are older adults who don't show this normal cognitive decline. Their brain doesn't shrink or atrophy like it does for the average older person. They don't have a buildup of plaque in their brains like we see in people with Alzheimer's disease, for example. These people aren't just different on the inside. They are also more energetic, they're positive, they're inquisitive, they're just more social. And the research is pretty new here, but it's estimated that maybe close to 5 to 10% of the older population are superagers. And there are a few regions of the world where people live substantially longer and that have particularly high numbers of centenarians, people who live to be 100. And I suspect also have a much higher number of superagers. And we call these places blue zones. There's one blue zone in North America, Loma Linda, which happens to be where I got my PhD and sparked my interest in this topic. It's about an hour and a half east of Los Angeles, and the others, as you can see, are in Europe and Japan and Costa Rica. So the obvious question that comes up is, what's different about these places? What's different about these people? And how can we become superagers? And I think diet is clearly one major factor here. And by diet, I don't mean dieting. I mean the quality and the quantity of food that we eat throughout our life. Hippocrates is known as the father of modern medicine, who's about 2,500 years ago, he recognized how important food was to overall health, and he commonly prescribed lifestyle modification, such as healthy eating, to his patients. I'm going to briefly describe a few diets that have a lot of research backing, where multiple high-quality studies have suggested that sticking to these foods not only reduces risk for dementia, and Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but it also reduces risk for a number of other medical problems like heart attacks and strokes and diabetes, and it also boosts brain functioning right now. And the Mediterranean diet has the most empirical support. It's characterized by a high intake of vegetables and beans and fruits and whole grains and fish, a low intake of meat, modest intake of wine, which we'll talk about in a bit. One meta-analysis, which means that it's a study that combined the results of other studies. They assigned scores from 0, meaning almost no adherence to this diet, up to 9, meaning that people were very adherent to a Mediterranean diet. They found that each 1 point increase on that scale from 0 to 9 was associated with an 8% reduction in risk of Alzheimer's disease, so at every point along that scale. Most of those blue zones that I mentioned adhere to something that resembles this Mediterranean diet. One exception to that is Loma Linda, whose population is mainly a sect of Christianity called SDA, Seventh-day Adventists. They typically stick to a vegetarian diet, which obviously is very similar to the Mediterranean diet, with the obvious exception of meat And there's an ongoing large-scale Adventist health study that looked at the health effects of vegetarianism. One study had over 70,000 Adventists, and they demonstrated a 12% reduction in all-cause death in vegetarians. They were just 12% less likely, to die from any cause. And the odds of developing diabetes are cut in half, even if you're semi-vegetarian. So it's definitely not all or nothing. There was an older Loma Linda-based study that also found a risk of dementia among vegetarians. And there are two other diets that have received a fair amount of research backing. One is the dietary approach to systolic hypertension, or DASH diet. The other is a hybrid of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. It's called the MIND diet. I'm not going to talk about those in depth because they're really similar to the Mediterranean diet. They've also been shown to reduce the risk of cognitive decline and dementia as well. So any of these diets, Mediterranean, DASH, MIND, that would be just fine as far as the research shows. So the question is, what is it about these diets specifically that improves brain functioning and helps reduce chances of developing medical problems and dementia? Clearly, it's multifaceted. So these foods generally have much fewer calories than a high-fat, a meat, or a kind of packaged food diet. So you're more likely to keep a healthy weight. They're higher in fiber, which is important for colon health. It reduces how much sugar and cholesterol gets absorbed and creates sort of a feeling of fullness, so you tend to take in less calories. These foods are higher in vitamins that are essential to brain processes. They have more overall nutrients, which improves that brain plasticity that I had explained at the beginning. So it's important to eat lots of different colors and textures and tastes, kind of like you see on in the pictures here. This means the different textures and tastes and colors. It means that there are different nutrients and vitamins in those foods. And these foods sort of act like fertilizer for our cells. Our grass doesn't grow if we don't give it the right nutrients, and our brain is no different. We have to give it the right nutrients and in order for it to work optimally. These foods also tend to have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, and these are just a few of the many potential mechanisms involved here. I want to highlight one food in particular, pomegranates, because my old lab at Loma Linda focused a lot on these. Pomegranates contain particularly large amounts of nutrients called polyphenols. Compared to other foods, they've been shown to reduce the detrimental effects of many different disease processes, some of which I've included on this slide here. My old research advisor, Dr. Rich Hartman, he was the first to demonstrate the effectiveness of pomegranates in a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease, where the mice that were administered pomegranate juice had half the plaque load and showed improved learning abilities compared to Alzheimer's controls. So these are pictures from his article. The plaque are these little black dots you can see. That was given pomegranate juice has greatly reduced plaque load compared to the mouse on the left that didn't receive any of the juice. And this literature translates to humans as well. So one pilot study out of the same lab used pomegranate supplements to prevent the memory deficits that often follow a cardiac bypass procedure. And another study with colleagues from colleagues who are at UCLA showed that after just 4 weeks of administering pomegranate juice to a group of older adults with age-related memory problems, subjects who received the pomegranate juice showed significant improvement on memory tests, and they had increased functional MRI, magnetic resonance imaging activity during those memory tasks as compared to placebo controls. And for my dissertation, I administered pomegranate supplements to a small group of stroke patients at our rehabilitation hospital. And I did neuropsychological testing, assessed functional abilities both before and after treatment with pomegranates. And I found the subjects who got the pomegranate pills had better cognitive and functional recovery, and they discharged from the hospital sooner than the placebo controls. So I want to be clear, I don't get paid by the pomegranate companies. I don't get any funding from them. And, this is not a miracle cure for anything. These studies, need to be replicated and expanded. And pomegranates are just one part of a healthy diet. But over and over, we're finding that the foods with high nutrient content, like pomegranates, they have tremendous health benefits. I lost my mouse here. I can move that. In addition to eating a variety of plant-based foods, there are many other strategies. The key is not to make a drastic change so that you're going to burn out on the diet in a month or two, but to really make small changes that you can sustain for the long term. Typically, the way to be most successful is to introduce just one change at a time, like having one day a week when you don't eat meat, or switching to drinking water instead of soda, for example. Preparation is really important here. So keeping junk food out of the house so you're not tempted to reach for it. And don't shop when you're hungry. Stick to your grocery list. Spend most of the time in the grocery store around the perimeter of the store where the fresh foods are. Preparing meals at home. Those kinds of changes really make a big difference. And just general guidelines are to control portion sizes. You can use smaller plates. You can eat slowly. You can stop eating when you're about 75% full. We can reduce sugar, especially by avoiding sodas, reducing salts, reducing trans fats, saturated fats. If you just look at the labels on the foods that you're buying, or buy foods without those labels, it can really help. You can hopefully find several potential problems with this food item here, the nutritional label. And of course, you should always, in addition to looking at the fat and the cholesterol and the sodium and the sugar content, we should also look at the number of calories, number of servings per container. At least this is how it is in the US. I'm not sure in India or elsewhere, how these look. But if this is available to you, I suggest that everyone pays attention to them. So there are all kinds of fad diets out there, no gluten, no carbs, no grains. Some of those diets might turn out to be good for some people or for some conditions, but the diets that I've presented, especially the Mediterranean diet, they're really where the most research backing is right now. And if you stick to this kind of diet, Mediterranean diet or those others, over years and decades, you really can't go wrong with that. And I think the quote from a food author, Michael Pollan, is really nice here, that I think we could boil diet advice down to just these 7 words. Eat food, meaning that we avoid packaged, highly processed items, which Pollan calls edible food-like substances. So to eat food, don't eat too much, and eat mostly plants. Pretty simple. And competing with diet for the title of best factor for our overall health is exercise. If exercise could be shoved into a pill, that pill would be the most effective medication that we have ever seen. In addition to all the benefits to just mood and psychological well-being in general, there have been shown to be major benefits to the brain and the body, like better blood flow, which means that more nutrients and oxygen are getting to the brain and other areas. It lowers risk of diabetes and blood pressure. It improves how your body uses its natural insulin levels, which again lowers diabetes. It improves the health of your heart, just generally speaking. Our immune system works better, so we're better able to fight off infections. It can reduce plaque buildup in blood vessels. It increases brain size in certain areas, especially ones that are important for memory. Similar to a healthy diet, exercise sort of acts like fertilizer for our brain cells and causes them to make more connections, and actually causes the birth of new neurons throughout life as well, which are just a couple ways that healthy brain plasticity is increased. All of these improve thinking skills and lower our chances of getting dementia. And now that you know many of the benefits of exercise, I'm sure that you're all going to make it a priority to get at least the amounts that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention recommends, which is a minimum of 2.5 hours of aerobic activity each week. So that's a half hour, 5 days a week, as well as resistance training a couple times a week, with working out with weights and things like that. This is a link to those guidelines in case anyone's interested. And of course, the more the better, the more exercise the better. So these are just minimum recommendations, but even if someone can't meet these goals, some activity is clearly better than no activity. So even a 10-minute brisk walk can count. There are lots of ways to incorporate exercise into our everyday activities, like parking toward the back of the parking lot. I'm not sure in India, but in America, people fight for a half hour just to find a good spot in the front of this store, rather than just walking a little bit. Using the stairs instead of the elevator is a good idea. Going for a walk every day, gardening works, cleaning the house. It doesn't require an expensive gym membership to reap these benefits. Just finding enjoyable ways to get moving and getting your heart rate up is so important, because as I alluded to before, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And that muscle strengthening part, the resistance training, is particularly important to prevent loss of muscle mass and strength that starts in our 40s and 50s. We start to lose muscle mass, and so the weight training and the resistance training is just as important as the aerobic activity. I love this cartoon. I think it's so true. All right. I always put a plug in for riding a bike, as I alluded to in the beginning. I think this is the closest thing that we have to a fountain of youth. Not only is it just great exercise, but if you ride a bike instead of driving short distances to run errands or to commute to work, if you live close enough to get around your city, it saves money, it burns less gas, you're less stressed. It's just fun, I think, as well. And this guy, Robert Marchand from Paris, he was 105 years old when miles an hour. That's 22.5 kilometers for those who aren't from the US. So if he can do it, I think we all can do it as well. So far we've talked about exercise, we've talked about diet. Enrichment is another major factor in a healthy life. Most of the original research on environmental enrichment came from studies with animals. Researchers realized that mice they were placed in cages that were bigger than the typical cage. This is the typical cage, and this is a much larger one. They were given toys and a running wheel. They had different tubes and other mice to interact with. they had substantially increased brain plasticity compared to animals in the typical lab condition, even when you control for the effects of exercise as well. And you can see the difference in the neuron of a mouse that was in a typical cage versus the neuron of a mouse that was in this sort of mouse paradise over here, and the enhanced branching that leads to more connections to other cells. And it's been shown that older mice profit even more from these types of enriched environments. But enrichment isn't just for mice. We can all stay mentally active by getting involved with challenging, interesting hobbies. We can audit classes at our local community colleges. We can learn an instrument or a language or carpentry. It doesn't really matter what we do as long as it's something that's new and difficult. Those are sort of the main ingredients. Brain plasticity might slow down over time as we age, but it doesn't stop. And these methods can kickstart those processes. Even short bouts of learning can increase brain size and improve thinking skills. And staying socially active is clearly also crucial. Many people, they hit age 65, they retire, and they see a drastic drop in their overall health. And this might be because they spend their days watching TV and being isolated. But our minds stay sharp when we are frequently involved in social activities. Dancing is one activity that not many people think about, but it's challenging on so many different levels. It doesn't matter what type of dance, of course, but it's not only a social activity, it's also physical. It improves balance. It's a mental workout as well. So I'd encourage people. I know it's hard right now in these times of the pandemic, but I think there are lots of ways still that we can keep active. And here are some other ways. Volunteering, spending time with family and grandchildren. If you have grandchildren, going to the senior center or being involved in different projects. It could be from home. Right now, through the computer. So lots of different things we can do. Purpose in life, or one's sense of meaning and reason for living, or overall growth, tends to decline starting in our midlife and then sort of plummets in our later years, unfortunately. So it's really essential that we continue to develop this sense of purpose no matter what stage of life or condition that we're in. All of those blue zones that I mentioned before, they're societies that really value social connection. They have very tightly knit communities. Families considered a top priority. They engage in meaningful activities well into old age. And I know we've discussed diet and exercise and enrichment, and sleep is another one that clearly, it doesn't matter how mentally sharp or intelligent you are. If you're not getting sufficient sleep, both quality and quantity of sleep, you're just not going. And it's going to take a toll on our bodies and minds. All of these symptoms here in this picture are associated with sleep deprivation, memory problems, impaired judgment, weakened immune systems, increased heart disease risk, on and on. One of the theories that sort of explains the benefits of sleep is that it's like spring cleaning, sort of getting rid of the trash, so to speak. Recent research has shown that some of the plaque that is associated with Alzheimer's disease, it gets washed out during the night in those deep stages of sleep, and that even one night of sleep deprivation can increase plaque levels compared to someone who got a good night's sleep. And on top of this, around 25 million Americans, and it's likely the case worldwide, I'm sure, have sleep apnea, which is a disorder where the air passage becomes blocked during sleep and it interrupts breathing. And some people stop breathing hundreds of times every hour. If you snore or if you wake up gasping for air during the night, you might want to ask your doctor about possibly doing a sleep study, to see if sleep apnea is present. It's really important because sleep apnea increases our risk for brain atrophy, shrinkage, for heart disease, for stroke, dementia, partly because we're depriving our brain of oxygen, and also because we're preventing our brain, our body from getting the deep, restful sorts of sleep that we need. And there's good treatments for it if that's a problem. There are several ways to improve sleep quality and quantity, even if you don't have sleep apnea or any kind of sleep disorder. We call these sleep hygiene because they're similar to other behaviors that improve hygiene. And I've listed some of them here. We need about 7 to 9 hours, and I think that this time should be prioritized. It should be not negotiable, unless you have a newborn. I have a 4.5-month-old, and it's hard for me to, practice what I preach here. But outside of having a newborn, I think, we should all prioritize our sleep and keep that time sort of sacred. And then you can read the other ones that I have listed here. We don't, I think just one thing to pull off from these slides is that you don't want, we want our brain to associate the bed with sleep, not with worrying, not with being awake in bed. So, one of the recommendations is if you're not getting to sleep after 15, 20, 30 minutes of just laying there out of bed, go do something else. You're not going to associate, being in bed with not sleeping. And working with a therapist, a psychologist, we're usually trained in sleep hygiene techniques. So that's something if insomnia is an issue, you can consult a professional. I would recommend that. My talk wouldn't be complete if I didn't just mention a few things that we all know are bad for us. As we saw from the Mediterranean diet earlier, light, modest amounts of alcohol, mainly red wine, can have beneficial effects. The research is a little bit mixed here, but what's not debatable is that in excessive amounts of alcohol use definitely increases our risk of liver problems and leads to a buildup of toxins, leads to nutritional issues, as well as strokes and brain atrophy and memory problems as well. The current recommendations are no more than 1 drink per day for women and no more than 2 for men. And these are the guidelines for what constitutes a drink here. Keep in mind that we become more sensitive to the effects of alcohol as we get older, and any alcohol might impact our balance, which leads to falls and head injuries and further decline in our thinking skills. So, and of course, certain conditions, certain people with a history of alcoholism or family history, this might be too much. But clearly, excessive alcohol for anyone is deleterious to our health. And stress is another one that's like chronic sleep deprivation. It leads to a number of different health issues, like gastrointestinal issues and obesity, immune system compromise, psychiatric illness. A few ways to combat stress I've listed here, practicing mindfulness or relaxation techniques, being optimistic and positive, having a positive outlook on aging. Really, there's good research showing that negative thoughts about aging are associated with a greater degree of memory problems and plaque buildup, as well as other problems, likely due to more stress and poor psychological well-being overall. So again, psychologists are the specialty that can treat these sorts of issues. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or depressed, you can seek out a professional. Collectively, the risks associated with lifestyle choices like having high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, especially smoking, all these negative health issues, the risk of developing cognitive impairment goes up by 16-fold if you look at all of these together. That was what one study found. People with good blood vessel health, they seem to be able to tolerate a bigger burden of plaque and brain problems without experiencing as many symptoms as well. It's another side benefit. I don't know if everyone's seen the movie WALL-E, but these are some people in WALL-E, and I'm fearing that we're becoming sort of like these people from WALL-E who are just sitting in their chairs, watching TV and it all day and not doing anything productive and meaningful. And I really hope that we this trend. Just in the U.S. I see it, and globally, unfortunately, we're also seeing it more and more. And I have to include a warning slide just to encourage everyone to be skeptical about certain treatments, in air quotes, that you might hear about, because these treatments, that are not prescribed by a doctor, they often don't have research showing, especially high quality research showing that they are effective or safe. There are all kinds of products out there from companies promising to cure memory problems with some miracle substance. In the States, we are constantly being shown commercials and ads for these sorts of supplements and products. And they just pop up at a rate that's impossible for clinicians and regulatory agencies to keep up with. If someone's making a claim that seems too good to be true and it doesn't have a series of well-designed studies to back it up, I just encourage everyone to be really skeptical about those and either do your own research. I mean, actually looking at the scientific studies, not what some celebrities might say about them, and to also ask your doctors, about those as well. And I understand that people might want to try everything that could possibly, help their memory problems or other ailments, but, I think people should know that there are some serious potential consequences to these unregulated supplements and treatments. And I've listed some of them here. The best case scenario when you take these sorts of snake oils that don't have any evidence behind them is that you get swindled out of a little bit of money. But you don't actually know what ingredients you're getting with these products because they're not regulated, or what side effects they might cause, or how they might interact with other medications. Plus, if you hold out hope in this sort of miracle pill, you might miss out on actual treatments that we know help, that have real evidence base behind them, like these lifestyle factors that I've been talking about. So I'll get off my soapbox there. I just, that was a public service announcement. And I wanted to just, before I end, briefly talk about the inner game, logical aspect of making lifestyle changes, because I feel like this might be more important than anything else. We all know that we exercise and sleep better, and I hope that it was helpful that I gave maybe some more details regarding the underlying mechanisms of why those behaviors are beneficial, and provided some ideas for how to engage in them. But actually putting these changes into action can obviously be incredibly difficult. Habits, just by definition, are difficult to break, and there are lots of reasons why people don't start or follow through with making healthy changes. And the American Psychological Association cites a lack of self-control, self-discipline, and willpower as the number one obstacle people face in achieving their goals. So you might be familiar with the famous marshmallow study, where a child was offered a choice between one marshmallow now or two marshmallows in 15 minutes. And the kids who were able to wait for the bigger reward were later found to have higher educational attainment They had better standardized scores. They had lower body mass index. They just had better life outcomes. So you can see this picture of the child's agony trying to wait for the the second marshmallow. This one probably doesn't have a chance of surviving. The marshmallow doesn't have a chance of surviving. But anyways, this internal struggle is just part of being human, and so I want everyone to be kind to ourselves, to allow for some lapses, but then to continue forward and slowly build those healthy habits over time. To realize that while we might not be able to control our desires, what we want, we can always control our actions, our behaviors. And I think it's important also for people to know that we've evolved to seek out instant gratification, right? But it comes with long-term consequences. And I think that, if we're going to succeed in our kind of overstimulating world, we're going to have to learn to distinguish between the false and sort of addicting rewards and the real rewards that give us long-term fulfillment and happiness. And I think we need to label our excuses, as excuses. And the most common excuse is that, well, we just don't have enough time. That's what I tell myself that sometimes. I might hear that from everybody around me. But really what that means is, that it's not a priority, right? Cooking at home or exercising or getting good sleep, it's not a priority when you say that. And so I would challenge everyone to just make these healthy lifestyle changes a priority, not just for, our present self, but also for our future selves as well. And, I think our future self is going to thank us, thank our current self for putting in the work that it really takes. And we also need to make what we call SMART goals. So these goals are really specific. They're measurable, attainable. There has to be some kind of aspect of it that's rewarding, and it has to be able to be achieved within a short amount of time. And so really setting those details, right? If you're going to make a goal, like you want to run a mile, you have to run a mile every couple of days. Know exactly where you're going to run. Put your shoes in front of the door so you remind yourself. Just make them and then measure the time that you're spending running, and put a time limit to that. So you're going to within a month you want to work up to a certain distance. Just make it really, really detailed. And there's a lot of books on this topic. One that I like a lot is James Clear's Atomic Habits. So I'd recommend people are interested in this area. They really should check that out. And the one last sort of area before I finish is I just want to briefly throw out a couple of ideas of how each of us might be able to have more of an impact on the health of our societies by improving the chances that others might make these healthy lifestyle changes as well. And so, of course, we can each make these changes in our own lives so that we can act as a model of these behaviors for others. But we can also educate, others about how lifestyle affects our brain health. Teach them how to cook healthy, ways to get better sleep and exercise. So education, I think, is a big factor here. I think we need to change the medical model from what I would call sick care, like it is now in many places where hospitals and doctors and insurance companies, they focus on managing diseases. I think we need to change that framework to more, true health care, where we focus on health promotion. We put our efforts into preventing the problems in the first place before they take hold. And, this last part I think is a little controversial. You might be able to figure out my political identity from this, but personally, I think we need to regulate junk foods and sodas and portion sizes like we regulate other unhealthy behaviors. We tax alcohol, we tax cigarettes, we have an age limit. Many ideas have been thrown out for this. for how to do this, taxing sugary drinks or not allowing stores to put candy on the lower shelves or in high traffic locations where kids are more likely to see them and more likely to be tempted. But reducing how much sodium companies can put in their products, having better labels, so people understand how much 30 grams of sugar in a soda actually is. We can stop advertising to kids these sorts of unhealthy products. We can provide a financial incentive for lower income families to adopt healthy diets. These are just a few ideas that I have, but I think something needs to change on a societal level for us to really make a difference overall. So just to recap, I know that was a quick run through of all those. I wanted to make sure I incorporated everything that was really important. But to recap here, to summarize, we can all shape our brains either for good or for bad, and that as we age, it becomes more difficult for our neurons, our brain cells, to grow and make those connections, which is why our thinking skills tend to decline. And we are more at risk of stroke and heart attack and diabetes and dementia, cognitive problems as well. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are superagers. There are blue zones. Yes, genes, of course, play a role. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm just, I'm shaming people who end up developing dementia or implying that it's because they didn't have a healthy lifestyle, because some people are going to have problems no matter what they do. They're just, genetically predispositioned. And, our bodies can only take so much. There's a normal amount of wear and tear that's to be expected. Eventually, if we all live long enough, we would all experience significant decline. But my goal today was to motivate you and hopefully convince you that there are many factors that are under our control, and that we can at least slow down cognitive decline and push it back, and that it's through healthy diet and exercise and staying mentally and socially active and finding purpose and meaning that we can accomplish these goals. The seeds of Alzheimer's disease get planted decades before we notice any changes. So no matter how old we are, right now is the right time to start making healthy changes and to potentially prevent those disease processes from taking hold in the first place. But even people who are already having cognitive problems can benefit. I think the current message from the literature is overwhelmingly optimistic and suggests that everyone can make meaningful changes that will improve their thinking skills and their overall brain health. But thank you for your attention, and seriously, if you consider riding a bike, if you don't already regularly ride. I should also mention that I have at least one article to back up. Sure. So please, let the conference organizers know if you'd like any of the references or other materials I have on this topic. But I did want to leave, some time for questions. So I'm happy to take any. I'm not sure, conference organizers, if you wanted to pick out some of the ones in the chat. I wasn't monitoring it as I was doing the lecture. I didn't want to get distracted. Does someone want to ask me certain questions?
Right. So, yes, sir, we have questions from our participants. First of all, thank you, sir, for the wonderful lecture. I'll start the questions. I'll start taking the questions one by one. So the first question is, restricted diet is in news for its benefit for losing weight and maintaining homeostasis. Can this be used towards brain plasticity?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely a hot topic right now. So and there's a couple of different variations of this: calorie restriction, or just reducing the overall amount, that you eat. There's also a related but somewhat different um, behavior of intermittent fasting. So the person might get a certain amount of calories, but they spend either a certain amount of every day or certain days a week not eating at all. And so I'll kind of address both of these because they're related. Um, and the person who asked this question is right. They mentioned that it can be effective for weight loss. And my understanding of the literature, and I should say up front, I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. My background, I'm a neuropsychologist. So, but I, in my understanding of the literature, my reading of the literature, I can definitely, address this to some degree. But I wanted everyone to have that caveat. So yes, it seems like it's effective for weight loss to some extent. We don't know long term whether that's going to be something that can be sustained. So in someone who restricts their intake, their calorie intake, we don't know the likelihood that that person's going to continue once they lose the weight to keep it off, which is similar with intermittent fasting. And sometimes it's pretty hard if you're not eating for, sometimes people have a couple days a week where they're not eating for the intermittent fasting protocols. That's hard to maintain. And in terms of the question specifically to cognitive abilities, there's just not enough high quality research for me to really say that it's advisable right now. There's a lot of animal research that shows promise for improving thinking skills and memory and learning, but it's a big jump to go from rodent models up to humans to translate that, and I don't think there's enough high quality human sort of clinical trials to really say that. I think it's something we should stay tuned about and keep monitoring the literature, because I think it is something like calorie restriction just in general. I mean, if you're eating, an excessive amount of calories, bringing that down to a normal calorie intake for your age and your gender, your sex is clearly advisable. But in terms of restricting it below that or intermittent fasting, I think that's going to be seen in the future, whether that is has long-term benefits for thinking skills.
Yeah. So the next question is, can dietary intervention prevent Werner's syndrome?
Werner syndrome? Yeah, I'm not a physician. Again, I don't know if I can comment on that too much. I think it's a little out of my area of expertise. So.
The next question is, what specific research areas do neuropsychologists usually work in?
Yeah, what research areas? So it varies dramatically, and there's different specialties within neuropsychology. So there's pediatric neuropsychologists that work with children. There's geriatric neuropsychologists that work mainly with older adults, and there's everywhere in between. And there's so many different types of disease processes, brain-related diseases, injuries that can affect thinking skills. And so it really just depends on what the person's area of interest is. So, if you're interested in stroke or Alzheimer's disease or spina bifida, in kids, it just ranges the gamut. And neuropsychologists are usually on teams of researchers. So we do the cognitive testing, the comprehensive assessment of thinking skills that could be part of a research study. So, you mentioned calorie restriction or intermittent fasting. It could very well be that a neuropsychologist works on that research team that looks at the cognitive effects of calorie restriction by testing people. Maybe before they start the diet, they test their thinking skills, and then maybe 6 months later, and they do the cognitive testing. But a neuropsychologist would do the assessment of thinking skills.
So our next question is, could you please tell about tau and amyloid distribution patterns for super agers?
Yeah, good question. So this, I mentioned how this research is still, I think, in its early stages as well. There are, some good studies, high quality studies on super agers that looked at, amyloid and tau deposition. And just for anyone who's not familiar, so amyloid beta, I refer to those as plaques, sort of colloquially. We say plaque, but I mean amyloid beta. And tau tangles, those are the two main hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. They are involved in other diseases as well, but they accumulate in our brains, and once they reach a certain threshold, we think that causes the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And so in superagers, the literature that I've seen has shown that they do not have the same amount of amyloid burden or tau tangles that we would expect for someone of a similar age, because as we get older, some of it does accumulate, and especially compared to others with Alzheimer's disease. I mean, they are much lower in terms of the overall burden of those the amyloid and tau.
So the next question is, were these super agers born with brains that have more volume and thus could better withstand the travails of aging? Or are their brains the same size as everyone else's and simply aging less rapidly?
Excellent question. Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't know exactly. I mean, it would be great if, since this is early on, we don't have too much longitudinal data on these individuals. It would be great to know, to have had a volumetric MRI 30, 40 years ago to compare now to how they're doing. So all we can do is look at this 85-year-old and brain volume relative to others at that same age, and it's hard, right? It's hard to know if they started out with that propensity, and I'm not sure yet if that's the case. My suspicion, though, I mean, these people have been studied, and it seems like they have all the lifestyle behaviors that they should have, for the most part. Many of them, on average, they're just more healthy in general. You can argue maybe that they were always healthier, and that protected them, or that they were from families who prioritize overall health. But we don't really know if just how good they were to begin with. I think that's also going to be sort of elucidated as more data comes out on these individuals.
So the next question is this statement right, that memory loss is not an inevitable part of aging?
So I would say that in general, so on average, yes, our memory has been shown to decline significantly. I showed that figure. Let me see, I can just pull it up right now. And I know this is just one study, but this holds up across a number of studies. So abilities tend to decline. And like I showed, it starts, like, this is someone in their 20s, so this is age. And there's a slow decline, and memory is, one of these listed here. Certain things do get better as we get older, like our reasoning, our vocabulary, more crystallized abilities rather than our fluid abilities. And so this is inevitable for most people. Most people are going to have this slope. And but what's different about these superagers is that they look much younger than someone. And so even if they do have a little bit of decline, those people in their 70s and 80s who are superagers, they look like they're in their 40s or 50s on testing, let's say. And so yeah, they've maybe had some decline, like we all would as we get older, but not nearly as steep of a drop. That helps clarify it.
So the next question is, what sort of logical or cognitive changes are introduced in the brain if someone meditates on daily basis?
Yeah. So I'm not intimately familiar with this literature, but there have been changes that have been seen. I'm mostly aware of the functional neuroimaging, so functional MRI. So looking at someone's brain activity, how their brain uses blood, and where the blood flows, where the blood increases, kind of shows where the brain's using more oxygen and nutrients. And there's been studies on long-term meditators, people who are, experts and have been doing this for quite a while, and they look different on those sorts of functional neuroimaging techniques. There's also different networks that are quieter or more active in their brains. So it does have changes, specifically regarding the level of neuroplasticity. I'm not sure if that's really been looked at well, but I would suspect that yes, it would have an effect on stress and mood and sense of meaning and purpose, and obviously mindfulness-based sorts of practices, being in the present moment rather than being worried about the future or ruminating on the past, clearly has psychological benefits. And so yes, I would expect that there would be pretty significant changes in terms of neuroplasticity as well as just in terms of their functional activity.
Next question is, in Okinawa, the blue zone in Japan, social support groups, moai, is a very important tradition. Has there been any significant research showing that such tradition contributes to super aging?
Yeah, definitely. So I presented some of the findings on social connection and maintaining. So it hits a number of different levels, right? Communities that are really tightly knit, not only are they socially just active, right? People constantly are interacting with everybody else, but also that social connection, gives a sense of meaning and purpose. And so it also hits, that important aspect. But as far as I'm aware of, all of those blue zones are areas that are really connected socially and really value social connection. So Loma Linda University, Loma Linda, the city, they have a really tight church community that they meet every week, and they have lots of projects and activities. It doesn't have to be through your church, though. This questioner asked about Okinawa. Yes, and you're right. It's more tightly knit and social. Sardinia, the island in Italy, has actually the largest number of centenarians, of people who live to be 100 or longer, and they are also very socially connected. So yes, this is incredibly important to stay socially active. And I know now with the pandemic, with COVID, it is so hard to be socially connected, and we're being told, rightfully so, that we should physically be separate. But I think there's a difference between being physically distant and being socially distant. I think we should be socially connected even while being physically separated. And so luckily we have lots of technology nowadays that can help with that. Obviously right now, I'm giving this webinar, I'm in the US giving this. And so we can all be connected globally. And I think that would help us maintain that social connection that we know is so important for our thinking skills.
Why do you think it's good to be a super ager? If everyone gets to have that, won't be a problem? Is healthy aging same as super aging?
Interesting. Yeah. So healthy aging, I would say it's I would say super aging is maybe a notch above healthy aging. Obviously, to be a super ager, you have to be healthy, but really the term superager, it's specific to people who don't show the cognitive changes that people at their same age level show. And so you can be aging in a healthy manner and still, be where you should be in terms of your age group. So that's an interesting question. I've never gotten that question before. Thought about it. What is it? Could it be a bad thing to be a super? I don't know. I can't see how that could ever be a bad thing. The more people we have in our society that are superagers, I think the better. The more productive they're going to be, the less care they're going to need, the less procedures and they're going to need, the less problems they're going to have in general. They can be contributing, well into their older age, and I think the more people, the better. So I would love if everyone was, really adhering to these lifestyle changes and really focusing on what's in our control. The person a couple questions ago asked about whether or not these people's brain was, larger to begin with. And I would say that, even though we're not quite sure, a lot of it is due to genes and runs in families, but I take the stance that we should control everything that we can control. And, we can't control our genetic makeup. And, some of us might just have a bad hand and we have certain conditions that we're predisposed to. But these behaviors that I've laid out are completely within our control. And we know from the literature can have an impact. So let's focus there. Everybody, I hope, can try to really do everything they can to promote these.
Right. I'll take one last question. There are several, but unfortunately, we cannot take all due to time
Right.
constraints.
These have been
Yeah.
great, though. These are tough questions.
The last question. The brains of super agers who have the memory performance of people decades younger seem to be shrinking at a slower rate. But why? So that's the question.
Yeah, that's important question empirically to ask, right? The research is still ongoing. We're going to have more and more data as we continue to look at this. I mean, like I said before, we don't have great longitudinal data because this is just something that recently became an area of interest from a research perspective. And as far as I know, there's only two groups, one out of Harvard and one out of Northwestern University, that's really looking at this. So hopefully we'll have better answers in the future. But I will say that it looks like there's less atrophy, there's less cerebral brain atrophy or shrinkage than is typical for their age, probably because of the neuroplasticity that I mentioned. The people who are sleeping well and clearing the plaque, clearing the amyloid beta from their brain and not letting it accumulate and disrupt those neurons. The people who are eating healthy and exercising, which sparks new brain cells. It's called neurogenesis. We're actually generating new brain cells, and exercise can spark that. The people who are psychologically sort of minded and focused on meaning and purpose. I think all these things, I'm convinced from the literature that these increase brain plasticity and reduce the that occurs just as a normal part of aging. So I think it's all really positive. That I think there are things within our control, and let's really focus on these both for ourselves and for society as a whole.
So thank you. So on behalf of Gargi College, the entire team of Neuro Eunoia 2020 and all the participants, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Dr. John Bellon for such an uplifting talk on becoming a super ager and providing us all with so many powerful and evidence-based lifestyle behaviors that people of all ages can do to reduce their chances of cognitive decline, eventually leading towards healthy societies And as well, thank you for taking all the questions so patiently. Thank you so much, Dr. Bellon, for
That
being
was my pleasure. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So now